you asked me how to get the person in focus but the background blown out. I'm just going to give you a quick walkthrough on how to get that set up, and we'll explain how it works later. Over on your dial, on your setting, on your, where you have the auto, switch that to A. A stands for aperture. That's how wide the lens opens up inside to take a picture. The more open it gets, the more light it lets in. The smaller it gets, the less light it lets in. The inverse is the more open it gets, the less that's in focus. That's called your depth of field, how much area is in focus. So to get that blown out background, you use a wide aperture. This is where it gets a little confusing. Bigger aperture, smaller number. Smaller aperture, bigger number. So f22, a 22 aperture, is super tiny. F on this lens you have goes as big as 1.8. That's 1.8 is big. So just memorize it, get it through your head, do whatever you need to do. In order to take a headshot picture, the other thing you have to keep in mind is distance to the subject. Taking a picture of somebody at, let's say, f2.8 from 4 foot away is not going to be the same as taking a picture at f2.8 at 12 foot away. The farther away you get, your depth of field gets larger. So if I was taking a picture from right here, the camera's depth of field at 2.8 might only be 3 inches. But if I scooted back and took that same picture, my depth of field might cover the whole entire camera. So those are two things to keep in mind. But if you're going to take a portrait shot, let's just say 4 feet away, I would set it at 2.8. So if you're in aperture mode, you rotate your front dial, and you'll see you have 2 numbers on your viewfinder. The first number is your shutter speed, how fast it opens and closes. Your second one is your aperture. So if your screen goes blank, it's because the camera shut down. It went into hibernation. Just press the shutter button halfway real quick, light it right back up. Rotate that dial until you get to 2.8. Point at your subject, get it to focus, press the button. Then if you can take that picture and look at it in your viewfinder, the bottom left button down here, it's got a little plus sign on it, a little magnifying glass, that'll zoom in. What you want to do is look at what you focused at. Typically on a portrait it's going to be their eyes. And make sure that what you want in focus is in focus. Because sometimes you use a small aperture, you get the eye in focus, and already by the time you get to the ear it's already starting to get blurry. Or you missed focus, so you got the tip of the nose, and already by the time it gets to the eyeball, it's out of focus. So just something to check. But set it to A, set it to 2.8, take your picture. If you find you want more things in focus, go a little bit smaller, which is a bigger number. A little smaller would be like 3.5 or 4 or 5.6. Typically, if you're shooting against a bland background in like a portrait, or I'm sorry, in a studio, they'll shoot at f.8. Or I'm sorry, f8. Excuse me. At f8, your background will still be in focus, but it's usually like a white background anyway, so it won't matter. That way you get everything that you need in focus. The whole model, the whole person, the whole portrait is in focus. If that's not what you're going for, try smaller. I would stay away from like 1.8 or 2 or even 2.2, because that literally will get you tip of the nose in focus, and by the time you get to the eye it's not, or inverse. The eye is in focus, but the tip of the nose will be blurry, or the ear will be blurry, and it's kind of distracting. It gives you that dreamy look. But if you're like, just trying to get pictures and it's dark, open it up to 1.8. I'm going to take a couple pictures. I'll show you the difference between 1.8, f8, and f22. The distance between me and my camera right now is probably 2.5 feet. The distance between my camera and the back wall is probably 6 feet. So gives you an idea of what we're talking about here. A couple things you notice there. When I shot 1.8, the shutter was pretty fast. I shot f8, it got slower. When I got f22, I actually turned the ISO up as high as it would go, and it was still very slow, as you saw. The general rule of thumb is you want your shutter speed to be at least as fast as your lens. So if your lens is a 50mm lens, you want to shoot at least 1/50th of a second. That rule came out before digital cameras. Digital cameras actually shoot a smaller picture. Most digital cameras, not all of them, but most digital cameras shoot a smaller picture than what film is. So you should actually shoot 1.5 times faster than your lens. So if you're shooting at a 50mm lens, half of that is another 25. So 1/75th. There is no 1/75th. So you want to shoot, I think it's 1/80th or 1/90th. Let me check here. You want to shoot at 1/80th of a second. If you got a big 200mm lens on your camera, you want to shoot at 1/300th of a second, because 200, half of that is 100, 1/300th. There is no 300th, so you're probably shooting at 1/320th. Hopefully what you'll notice with time is that shutter speed goes up, your aperture needs to go down in order to make a good picture. When the other variable in there is your ISO, which we talked about. The higher, if you want to shoot really fast shutter speed and a really small aperture, the only way you're going to make that happen is to turn the ISO up. If you turn your ISO up, you start getting grainy pictures. So you got to kind of play a mixing game on which one's okay. The reason you do that 1/50 or 1/75 is because you're standing a picture, you're going to stand there and take a picture, and you think you're holding your camera perfectly still. You're not. There's just natural camera shake, just from standing there. That's where the 1/over rule comes from. Catch your camera on a tripod, pretty much ignore that rule. So just keep that in mind.